Welcome back. The Russia-Ukraine war enters its 163rd day. Let's take a look at the main developments. But first to Sochi, where Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has met his Russian counterpart today after brokering a grain shipment deal between Moscow and Kyiv, and as new Turkish military intervention in Syria remains a possibility. The summit with Vladimir Putin comes in the same week that a ship carrying Ukraine grain was able to set sail, the first since the conflict began, under an agreement between the warring sides arranged by the United Nations and Ankara. The Turkish leader's international credentials have been bolstered by the agreement that resumes exports of Ukrainian and Russian agricultural products, easing the threat to global food security. Erdogan's trip, his eighth to Russia since the start of 2019, follows a three-way meeting with Putin and Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi in Tehran last month. According to Ankara, regional and global developments will be on the agenda, as well as bilateral ties. Russia said today that it was ready to discuss a prisoner swap with the United States in private, a day after a Russian court jailed U.S. basketball star Brittney Griner for 9 years for a drugs offense. The case against Griner, a two-time Olympic gold medalist and Women's National Basketball Association star, plunged her into a geopolitical maelstrom after Russia sent troops into Ukraine in February 24. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said President Vladimir Putin and U.S. President Joe Biden had previously agreed on a diplomatic channel that should be used to discuss possible prisoner exchanges. Ms. Lavrov, during a visit to Cambodia, said, "We are ready to discuss this topic, but within the framework of the channel that was agreed upon by Presidents Putin and Biden. If the Americans decide to once again resort to public diplomacy, that is their business, and he would never say that it is their problem." U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Washington was prepared to engage with Moscow through the established diplomatic channels. He said Griner's conviction highlighted her wrongful detention by Russia and further compounded the injustice that had been done to her. The Kremlin has remained tight-lipped on the prospect of a swap, saying that if prisoner exchanges were discussed in the media, they would never happen. Meanwhile, the White House has urged Russia to accept the substantial offer made for the release of basketball star Brittney Griner, convicted of drug charges. Both White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre and National Security Spokesman John Kirby said Griner should have never faced the trial where she was found guilty of bringing cannabis-infused vape cartridges into Russia. Jean-Pierre said the offer was also made for U.S. citizen and former Marine Paul Whelan. Griner, a two-time Olympic gold medalist and a Women's National Basketball Association star, was arrested mid-February as she arrived to play for a Russian side during the WNBA off-season.
Russia is wrongfully detaining Brittney. She never should have had to endure a trial in the first place. As you all know, we have made a substantial offer to bring her and Paul Whelan home. We urge Russia to accept that proposal.
I know everybody is making some assumptions here about what that proposal is. I won't go into detail about it, but it's a serious proposal. We urge them to accept it. They should have accepted it weeks ago when we first made it. We have seen similar maximum sentences for drug charges of foreigners in Russia. They typically, it's just historically speaking, foreigners that are arrested on drug charges and then convicted under their system tend to get much higher sentences than would be Russian citizens.
Brittney Griner's former high school basketball coach said the WNBA star is misunderstood and expressed disappointment in Griner's imprisonment, conviction, and sentencing to 9 years in Russian prison Thursday. Debbie Jackson coached Griner at Houston's Nimitz High School, where Griner graduated in 2009. Jackson was a coach at the school from 1991 to 2012.
So it's been very difficult, especially because I know Brittney is a great person. She was a great person in high school. She never craved the limelight, and really throughout her college career and her professional career. She's not one that wants to be in the limelight. She just wants to do her job. She loves her teammates. She always gives credit to her teammates. It's never been about her and how she can be the star or the superstar, even though she is one. It's been sad. It's been frustrating because so often you just didn't have any news at all of what was going on. I just can't imagine how her family is feeling because they have not been allowed to have any communication with her, and to think that you have a daughter and you can't give them encouragement, try to boost their morale. My heart goes out to the whole Griner family as well as her wife.
Dr. Michael Ogu from the Department of Political Science, Public Administration, Babcock University, joins me now for more. Welcome to the program. Do you have any fears as to the possible prisoner swap between Russia and the U.S.?
Good evening, Millicent. Thank you for having me. So it's quite a sad, it's quite a sad incident, especially for the family of Griner. Who was the most recently convicted, who has been convicted recently in Russia. But I think that, just like somebody in the last clip you played was mentioning in the White House, the Russian sentencing of foreigners who are convicted of drug crimes, particularly, tends to always be longer than those who are Russians who are convicted also of the same crime. And if you look at Griner's case very closely, you will see that Griner she had those were prescribed medications which she was supposed to take. Just that they were not allowed in the Russian territory, and of course it is not legal in Russia for her to have those, and that's why she was caught. So ordinarily. It's not something that should have gone to trial and should have warranted a 9-year sentence. If the law was being followed, fairly, basically. But of course, this is what we have now, and I see that Russia is perhaps trying to play some, is trying to use this to their political advantage, And again, if you look at the criminal, or if you look at the people. The people who have been swapped, you will also see some kind of disparity. This is not the first time that a prisoner swap is taking place between the U.S. and Russia. There was one in April too, where a former U.S. Marine was also swapped with a convicted drug smuggler. A Russian drug smuggler was swapped between Russia and the U.S. in April. So this is not the first time, and of course, in these two cases, you can see that the swap, the Russians who are in U.S. prisons are there for legitimate crimes, drug trafficking, arms trafficking, whereas those who are in the Russian prisons are there for things that can actually be excused, fairly speaking, in terms of law. So there seems to be a disparity in the individuals and the cases, but of course, Russia. Is trying to play is trying to make some political gains with this. And I think that if the US, like of course there have been speculations that if the US goes through with this and releases this merchant of death, as he's popularly called, that could also be a very serious threat to the US national security, and Americans who are also living in America and outside of America. So I think that there's a potential threat, which also calls for some kind of caution in how this prisoner swap, this particular one, is being handled.
You mentioned the former swap deal, which involved Trevor Reed and the Konstantin Yaroshenko, which appeared to be 1-1. But this time the U.S. is saying 31-year-old athlete and then former Marine Paul Whelan, and then of course Russia is saying this. But another thing that's happening is Russia is saying that it doesn't want the U.S. to use it calls it megaphone diplomacy, saying that they should sort this out in private. Why do you think it's insisting on discussing this matter privately?
Well, I think it's a very sensitive issue, number one. And of course, the U.S. Press Secretary and the other man who was speaking were not also very to give out much detail. So it's a very confidential issue, and it's also a matter of state security because some of these things, if they're not handled very well, information that is not for public consumption can go out. So if the Russian president and the U.S. president have already agreed on the kind of diplomatic line to discuss these kind of issues, I think the two parties should respect that agreement and stick to, the channels that have been earmarked and agreed upon to discuss these issues. I don't think that should be a big deal. The point should be, resolving the issue and getting the young lady back to her family, and of course the other American who is also in jail, who has been in jail, back to his family as well. So I think the channel should not be so much of an issue, but rather, the swap, if it's possible, or by whatever other means that these Americans can be brought back home. I think that should be the concern.
And if it does occur, could it soften their relationship, seeing as, on the other hand, which is the war in Ukraine, they are at loggerheads? What are your thoughts on that? And also the tensions over Taiwan, this is between the Russia and US, how it's affecting negatively the Russia-Ukraine war.
Yeah, so I think the prisoner swap is an entirely different issue from the tension between the U.S. and Russia in terms of this invasion. Being that, of course, like we mentioned, one swap has already successfully taken place earlier this year, and this is just another one. So I think these are two separate issues. Even though, of course, there's an overlap and there are influences here and there, on all these issues. But be that as it may, it is possible. It is possible. Of course, we cannot completely separate these issues. So it's possible that if perhaps these deals are successfully brokered, then it could also positively be an influence on the U.S. Russia tension in terms of the Ukraine invasion. That is that. And then, of course, you mentioned the Taiwan issue too. I think that that is it's a very particularly interesting situation because there's some similarity between what is happening in Ukraine now, and the Taiwan and of course and the Taiwan region, and that's because of course just like the Ukraine, Taiwan is also a territory and an island that is close to China. All right. And this island has always been self-governing right from 1949, I think, and they have always been a pro-democracy, pro-democratic island, and so China rather now trying to, of course, it has always wanted to annex that region, bring them back into the mainland of China, the Communist Party, I mean. That move has always been there, right from when the Communist Party took over leadership in China. So I think that it is very, we can see a lot of similarities. And then, of course, if the US is not cautious, in how they go ahead with supporting their allies, which of course is the Taiwanese region is of course a very major ally of the US. If they're not cautious, then of course it can escalate and become what we're seeing now in the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Now, the Nancy Pelosi visit, I don't think that was a very necessary, stunt to pull this past week. There could have been other ways to go about that. So I think that was a very major negative, move in terms of this tension and the US, and of course China in question too. But of course, I think that, as time goes on, there has to be caution. There has to be caution between the US, between China in addressing this issue. And of course, we can see that territorial integrity is becoming a lot more, it's becoming a lot more of political concern, in this dispensation. Of course, with Ukraine, with Taiwan, several other areas that are still basically puppets of these major superpowers. So I think there should just be caution in how this Taiwan issue is addressed. Otherwise, we'll have another similar, incident of Ukrainian invasion in our hands, and that will not be very, very good for China or for the US as well.
The world does not want that. We appreciate your time. Thank you so much, Dr. Michael Ugo is from the Department of Political Science, Public Administration, Babcock University. Thanks again.
Thank you for having me.
Meanwhile, Russian forces at Europe's largest nuclear power plant in Ukraine are employing terror tactics by using the site to launch rocket attacks on civilian residents. This is according to the residents there. The local businessman says that every morning they wake up, they see they have hit only residential homes. Russia controls the Zaporizhzhia plants and surrounding areas close to the Ukrainian-held territory. Western officials have sounded the alarm about Russia's tactics there. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant lies in the southeast of Ukraine along the eastern bank of the Dnipro River. It is currently still being operated by Ukrainian employees under Russian supervision. And the Russian Defense Military has reported its forces shooting down Ukrainian drones and intercepting artillery shells in several places, while Ukraine said that its troops have repelled Russian attacks in Slovyansk and elsewhere. In the past 24 hours, the Russian Air Defense Forces shot multiple Ukrainian drones in Donetsk and Kharkiv regions, intercepted a series of artillery shells fired by multiple rocket launcher systems in Donetsk and Kherson regions. Russia's Defense Ministry spokesman Igor Konashenkov said that the nuclear-capable Iskander-M tactical missile systems had carried out more than 50 strikes since the launch of the special military operation and had destroyed Ukrainian military infrastructure, personnel, and weapons. The depots containing weapons and military equipment supplied to Ukraine by NATO were also destroyed. And the funeral ceremony of Oleksiy Vadaturski, and this is the founder and owner of one of Ukraine's largest agriculture companies, is holding today in Kyiv. Oleksiy Vadaturski, the co-founder director of Nebulon, was killed in his home alongside his wife Reza in the southern city of Mykolaiv on Sunday by what Ukraine says was a Russian missile strike. According to the Ukraine's president, he said people like these companies, like these, guarantee the world's food security. Zelensky said that about Vadaturski and his wife after their death, expressing condolences to their relatives in a public address. The Ukrainian Grain Association said that he was a titan of Ukraine's agricultural sector. Vadaturski was a towering presence in his native Mykolaiv, where he headquartered his company since its founding in 1991. The company emerged from the turbulent 1990s as one of the key players in Ukraine's agricultural market. Still ahead on the program. British store cupboard classics gets a makeover as ice cream. Stay with us for more.